In the Empire of Actilos, many heirs are born, and only the strongest sits on the throne. This means they die killing each other, and whoever survives becomes emperor. The youngest heir and the youngest participant in this bloody ceremony. A 13-year-old prince killed all his brothers and sisters. He tied the hair of all of them and, dragging them, arrived before the previous ruler. The emperor, moved by the strength of the youngest prince, was happy and wished to praise him. But at that very moment, a dagger plunged into his chest. The young prince, smiling naively before the eyes of his father, who was spitting blood. He said that waiting bored him too much. He wanted to obtain the throne immediately. Furthermore, he was bothered that someone was above him. And right now he is the current Emperor of Actilos, Raniero Actilos. Angelica is next to the marriage altar beside the emperor, as she was sold to this tyrant as a bride. The priest asks them to seal their union with a kiss. And looking at Raniero, the young woman is surprised that he looks completely different. However, he suddenly gives an ominous smile, relieved that Angelica has finally woken up. Otherwise, a little more and he would get bored. In reality, all this happens in a novel, into which Angelica arrived directly at the episode of her wedding to the emperor. The protagonist of the novel, the goddess Seraphina, is the true flower that bloomed in the Actilos Empire. Before meeting the goddess, Emperor Raniero was always obsessed with acquiring territory. In Seraphina's bright eyes, he saw his blood-stained reflection and begins to feel intense feelings for her. Love and hate. Raniero steals her from the temple and takes her to the Imperia, where he plans to turn her into someone just like him. But instead, she becomes even more beautiful. The emperor's obsession increased even more, and he killed Seraphina's first love, the Knight Eden. The goddess cannot stand it and loses control, while Raniero loses his mind. Besides them, there were other characters in the novel. But Angelica gets into the body of the empress, who in the story was barely a reflection. Since divorce is not allowed in the Imperia of Actilos, and one can only remarry after the spouse's death. Upon stealing the goddess, upon returning from the temple, Raniero immediately cut off his wife's head. And so, Angelica acquires the body of the empress, whose head was cut off right at the beginning of the novel. She has read many tales of traveling souls, but normally the protagonists end up as villains. And they are saved by not repeating their actions. Finding no other solution, Angelica decides that the day Raniero goes to the temple, she will fake her death and escape. She is happy about the idea she just had, since the emperor will not verify if she is dead, because he killed her only to marry the goddess. Until then, she decides to pretend she doesn't even exist and appear less in front of Raniero. While reflecting on all this, Angelica does not realize that the emperor suddenly appears in front of her. He asks her with a cruel smile how much longer she plans to keep pretending she doesn't see him. Ignoring his presence, Angelica immediately replies that she could never show him such contempt. Taking a clumsy step, accidentally, she steps on the edge of her dress and falls flat on the ground. Although she is embarrassed by the fall, she is glad she answered quickly, as Raniero hates delays. Even several servants lost their lives for not quickly correcting what displeased the emperor. Raniero steps on her dress, smiles maliciously, and gives the empress a chance to explain herself. To justify herself, Angelica invents that she suffers from a chronic illness that leaves her unconscious with her eyes open. Seeing that he doesn't believe her, she adds that Raniero's aura is so powerful that a being as tiny as her could not withstand it. When asked if it is her fault, she quickly deflects by comparing him to the sun. No one blames the star if one looks at it too much and gets blinded. The emperor wonders if she plans to spend the rest of her life without looking him in the face for fear of fainting. Trying to find the right answer, Angelica asks his permission to look at him. And she looks up. Raniero feels satisfied with his choice of empress. Humbly, she falls before him and answers instantly. She grips his throat and promises to answer any question he asks. She understands that her life now depends on his question, so she asks him why he chose her. However, Raniero is disappointed. He considers it boring, vulgar, and conservative. The emperor fears getting bored answering, but keeps his promise out of pity. When Raniero announced his marriage, so many aristocrats and kings sent portraits of their daughters that the room was filled. He ordered the portraits hung on the wall. He sat on a cushion at the foot of the bed and threw a knife at the wall. Raniero is entertained, recalling the instant the blade pierced Angelica's left eye, and revokes his criticism. But his mood changes immediately, and, holding the young woman's chin with the tip of his boot, he advises her to try harder. Otherwise, he promises to kill her, and Angelica promises to improve and be more interesting. Raniero leaves the room, and throwing himself directly on the floor, the young woman celebrates that the wedding day went well, and that he hasn't killed her yet. At dawn, Angelica wakes up to the Emperor's touches under the blanket over her body, and gets up immediately. Raniero is dissatisfied because she slept until 9 and calls her lazy. As she dresses, he calls her banal, boring, monotonous, and completely unattractive, and leaves the bedroom. The maid suggests the Empress start her morning preparations with a bath, and the young woman accepts. Since Raniero called her boring and monotonous, she hopes he won't see her again. Angelica must find a way to escape, and she learns from the maid that today is May 19th. The Emperor met Serafina in the Tuniu church on a freezing winter, which means there are still about 7 months until the decisive moment. Until last night, the young woman remembered nothing about Angelica except her name. But the memories of her body began to seep into her mind. Angelica is the second princess of the kingdom of Hanro. She has an older brother, an older sister, and a younger brother. She was a member of the royal family. Therefore, she must have studied the basics of history and geography, which will help her decide where to flee. The border of the country she flees to must not be too far from the palace, nor have conflicts with the Imperia. Security should be less strict there, and it doesn't matter if the country is rich and strong, or weak. Because anyway, in spring, after the emperor's collapse, the country, whose system depended on an outstanding leader, will be destroyed. While having breakfast, Angelica notices that the ladies-in-waiting keep their distance, and thinks it's good, as she doesn't need to get close to them since she plans to escape. And otherwise, unexpected problems could arise. However, for now she decides to behave naturally, adopting the role of a good empress. She asks the ladies their names, and the eldest introduces herself as the mother of Marquis Yaxui. The youngest is Marin, Countess Lack's wife, and Angelica is surprised to see that both come from prominent families. She doesn't understand why she feels so uncomfortable, and to relieve it, she asks them to help her adapt to the castle. The Empress checks the schedule and discovers that there is no official plan today, so she can rest. Since she still has 7 months left, she accepts the offer, but the following days they give her the same answer. Now, Angelica understands why there is discomfort. The ladies avoid her, as it is absurd for an empress to have no schedule. Reflecting on what to do, she remembers that her character brought a maid named Sison with her from her land. And so, in the morning, during tea, the Empress asks the Marchioness where the maid is and why she doesn't see her anywhere. According to Yaxui, Sison is training to become a suitable lady-in-waiting for Actilos. Angelica doesn't object to the maid training, but finds it strange that, as the owner, she knows nothing about her. The Marchioness thought that, since the Empress hadn't asked about Sison, she must have known. Realizing that the woman in front of her is quite astute, Angelica decides to act differently and, apologizing, she admits her mistake. Knowing that it is not vanity, but the goal that drives her, the young woman decides to yield first, and asks again with a smile if she can see Sison. Sitting at home with her son, the Marchioness of Jakiziu despairs because the Empress turned out not to be as foolish as she initially thought. The woman is irritated to see a young girl from a small kingdom dare to contradict her. Her daughter Sylvia enters the room upon hearing the commotion and wants to know what is happening. The Marchioness is sure she wouldn't have suffered so much if Sylvia had been the Empress. It pains her that the family missed the right age to marry her off, hoping the Emperor would choose her. Sylvia asks her mother not to hate her so much, as it was the Emperor who chose her. And she also asks her brother to say something. However, the Marchioness doesn't want to hear anything and is furious at having had to wait in vain for so long, which devalued her daughter. Unable to bear her aggressiveness, Sylvia runs crying from the room, and the Marquis asks his mother not to worry so much. He is the treasury supplier, and, being close to the Emperor, he is sure that he himself will get rid of the wife when they are given a good reason. Understanding that they only need a pretext, the Marchioness and her son Yaxiu decide to discreetly whisper to the Emperor about Angelica's flaws. Since Raniero follows the rule, everything that can harm the country is immediately destroyed. And all that is needed is a small push. In the nation, it is currently the budget coordination period, and the funds of all institutions are reviewed by both the Emperor and the Empress. But Angelica doesn't deal with matters at all, and anyone would say this hinders the prosperity of Actilos. After Sison returned, several quiet days passed, since this maiden really knew her lady very well. Although during all this time the main lady-in-waiting, Marchioness Jackassy, continued to ignore the Empress, she decided not to react in any way. However, now Angelica understands that she shouldn't have, since the Emperor summoned her presence. And this is undoubtedly the work of the ladies-in-waiting. Not knowing who came with them to Raniero, Angelica decides, just as a precaution, to bow deeper before him than her companions. It turned out to be Marquis Yaxi, who had prepared the third quarter budget proposal for the Emperor. The Marquis reports a problem arising with the funds allocated to the Empress's palace. Raniero is impressed by Angelica's bravery, as he thought she had approved an excessive amount for her own palace. However, the Marquis suddenly reveals that the Empress wasn't actually taking care of the palace, but was indulging in pleasures. According to his words, she showed no desire to fulfill her duties, and he found an employee carrying out matters in her name. Angelica realizes that during all this time, the Marchioness deliberately left her without tasks to set up this whole circus. According to the Marquis, entertainment expenses were added. And although the officials pretended not to see it, he himself could not stand aside. Although this man's words were false, the young woman has no way to prove he is lying. During all this time, the Marchioness isolated Angelica, and only Sazin can support her in the palace. When asked what Jackassy desires now, the young man replies that he has no hidden intentions. He insists on his loyalty to the imperial family, leaving it to Raniero to make the decisions himself. The girl doesn't understand how these people try to convince the Emperor with such a boring excuse. Angelica notices Raniero's expression, which seems to remind her to invent something before the Emperor gets angry at the monotony. She affirms that her heart aches to see the Emperor forced to do routines, although the budget proposal could have been agreed upon with her. To express her repentance to the Emperor, she proposes an entertainment to cheer up Raniero. Seeing the Emperor's interest, Angelica suggests organizing a human hunt. For prey, she proposes the three standing in front of him, which horrifies the Jacquet family. The book mentioned human hunts, and Angelica knew that this idea would interest Raniero. However, she must save herself, so she reminds the Emperor of her chronic illness. She explains that hunting her would be like hunting a sick rabbit, completely boring. When asked if she is trying to escape the fate of prey this way, she promises to train and be worthy prey for the winter. The Marquis gets angry with Angelica. He considers her idea foolishness and an unwise proposal. Taking control of the situation, the girl accuses Jacquet of not having informed her about the budget from the beginning. Therefore, the Marquis must accept as an honor being the prey, since the Emperor wasted time on a routine matter. The girl's monologue ends with applause from Raniero, clearly pleased with his Empress. The Marquis asks not to subject his elderly mother to so much cruelty, and that only he should do it. The Emperor orders that the possibility of experiencing honor by being prey for his pleasure not be called cruelty. Raniero, by snapping his fingers and calling the guards, agrees with Angelica that the fault lies with the three of them. According to him, the Empress is at fault for not preventing the Marquis and his mother from coming to bother him. They are responsible for trying to use the Emperor to resolve their personal disagreement with his wife. Raniero suspected something like this might happen, since the Marquis's younger sister was not chosen as his fiancée. He knew everything, but let the situation take its course, as he had no reason to pay attention to such personal ambition. Wondering if Sylvia would have been an equal empress, Raniero approaches Angelica. He lifts her face and kisses her. Noticing that the young woman makes no mistakes, he lifts her in his arms and asks if she will be able to avoid them forever. The next day, there were changes in the Empress's palace. The Marquis became prey and left his position as main lady-in-waiting. For the Actilos Empress's maids, that position was a burden, and the position was obtained by Sison. Following the change of main lady-in-waiting and a series of incidents in the palace, no one underestimated the Empress anymore. Since Angelica did not participate in social life, they began to see her as a cold empress. And arrogant. Although she worried about these rumors, she began to fulfill the Empress's duties. So she was very busy. One day, leaving the castle, Angelica sees a young woman in the courtyard and wonders who she is. From the maid, she discovers that it is Sylvia, Henry Jaxcu's younger sister, the prey in the human hunt. The young woman arrived at the castle to request an audience with the Empress. Angelica doesn't understand why Sylvia comes now, when her family's fate was decided days ago. It turned out that the girl had been here for several days since the sentence was confirmed. Angelica agrees to receive Sylvia, who introduces herself respectfully. The Empress regrets that she had to wait so long, but immediately affirms that she cannot annul the penalty. However, surprisingly, Sylvia declares that her loved ones received what they deserved. Sylvia kneels before Angelica and asks for employment, as with the departure of her foolish mother. The maid's position becomes vacant. The Empress doesn't understand why the daughter of her enemy wants to serve her. Perhaps she intends to hide, observe her, and wait for the right moment to attack, and take revenge on her mother and brother. Sylvia explains that she was raised to be the Emperor's companion, or the Empress's fidelity and ally. Much of her life was spent locked up at home, without influence. And now, with her family fallen as prey, she has nowhere to go. Of course, Sylvia's heart aches for her family. They are her relatives, even if they were mistreated alongside her. However, without holding back tears, she admits that, above all, she wants to live. Lying in bed before sleeping, Angelica thinks that the only one whose heart was not moved by Sylvia is Raniero. But this is not a situation to decide out of compassion, as the young woman probably hates her. Angelica jumps out of bed and goes out onto the balcony to breathe fresh air and clear her thoughts. Suddenly Raniero appears, and the young woman screams in surprise. Angelica asks him why he is there, but the Emperor sees no need for a reason to visit his wife. He asks how her day went, and comments that he is satisfied that his prey has started training. Raniero decided to add 2 rules to the hunt, to give the prey weapons, and if they resist for 3 hours, they will be released. The Emperor asks Angelica how she fared again, and she is about to tell him about Sylvia. Before she can say anything, Raniero recommends accepting her, considering her interesting. He suggests sending Sylvia to the hunting grounds as a hunter to kill her mother and brother and test her loyalty to Angelica. The Empress is surprised how easily he managed to understand her doubts, but for him, the insecurities of common beings are obvious. Raniero proposes accepting her as a lady-in-waiting, on the condition that she fulfills the role of hunter. Angelica accepts, but noticing her doubts, the Emperor offers her a glass and promises to give the direct order to Sylvia. He smiles, considering the Empress weak and incapable of issuing even a simple command. Raniero Actilos was born human, but he is closer to a divine creature, observing people like insects. There is no tragic story from his childhood that made him cruel. He was simply born with pure evil. Suddenly, he pours the offered glass over Angelica and accuses her of unusual cowardice. The Emperor asks the girl to forget fear for a moment while immersing herself in pleasure. And this image of absolute dominant evil, more beautiful and powerful than any other. He grabs her and throws her onto the bed. Lying next to her, Raniero comments that Angelica is tiny and weak, but that she must become good prey. The girl agrees with his promise to the emperor, although in reality she has no intention of being prey. She will play hard to get, and when Raniero leaves for campaign, she will escape. And upon finding Serafina, she won't even bother looking for her. The emperor suddenly remembers the second rule he added to the hunt. He wants Angelica to participate as a hunter. Raniero thinks he doesn't have to worry, as the prey cannot harm the hunter according to the rules. However, Angelica is sure that Jacques' mother and son, with no escape, will not miss the opportunity to take her with them to death. Although Raniero introduced all these regulations, he perfectly understands that they are worthless. The hunt is scheduled for the solstice, and there is less than a month left. Angelica intended to improve her relations with the aristocracy before the festivities. But for survival, she canceled all social events. As a hunter, she was allowed to go to the pavilion and watch the prey's training. In the Actilos Empire, all inhabitants train in martial arts so that, in case of war, women and children can participate. According to Angelica's lady-in-waiting, Duchess Nurmi, until yesterday Jacques was lazy in training. But everything changed after the emperor's visit, who surely communicated the new regulations to them. They are looking for the best teacher for Angelica. And the young woman expresses her desire to learn how to shoot. If she enters the range, she will lose. So she must keep her distance from the prey. The empress asks Nurmu to teach her how to shoot with the weapon that shoots the farthest. As she starts practicing archery, Angelica complains about the weight of the weapon, which surprises the court maid. Since even children hold the bow, she regains composure, stands up, grabs the bow and arrows and aims, hoping to at least hit near the target. The emperor summons Sylvia to talk about her desire to become Angelica's court maid. He informs her that she must pass a test as a hunter at the solstice festival. Disappointed by the surprised reaction he expected to see on her face, Raniero orders the guard to take Sylvia away. Through his assistant, the emperor learns that Angelica canceled all social events to learn archery. He calls her cowardly with a mocking smile, but then discovers that the young woman lost consciousness. Upon waking up in bed, Angelica murmurs quietly, as it seemed to her that her character, being a princess, should have received some training and had more stamina. As if appearing out of nowhere, Raniero appears, surprised by the way she speaks, as if having no memories of her own childhood. Upon learning that the emperor visited her, upon learning of her loss of consciousness, Angelica thanks him for his concern. Raniero observes that the young woman is still pale and considers her foolish for not knowing that one must rest when tired. Obviously, the inhabitants of this country do not think that people can simply be weak. Angelica cries, explaining to Raniero that she knows the importance of rest, but she is only trying with all her might not to die. He smiles, affirms that the empress will not die, and orders the maid to bring cold water and a towel. Raniero places the towel on Angelica's forehead, but quickly gets bored taking care of her, and calls for a lady-in-waiting. Seeing how the emperor settles into the armchair, the young woman perceives danger, as his movements clearly express boredom. Angelica asks the duchess to bring food, and barely 10 minutes pass. Raniero feeds the empress with a small spoon, surprised by how little she eats. The emperor urges the young woman to train well and not become prey, otherwise he won't be able to marry her off in winter. According to the empress, this is precisely why she is looking for a good instructor to train. Upon learning that Angelica hasn't found a trainer yet, he decides to start teaching her himself. She accepts his proposal with gratitude and promises to try to become a good hunter. Waking up in the morning, the empress feels much better. The remedy Raniero gave her worked wonders. He administered a drug that plunged her into a deep sleep. He stayed by her side all night and only left at dawn. Angelica asks Zizane when the emperor summoned her to the training ground. And upon learning that the maid doesn't know, she gets furious. She hastily gets dressed so as not to bother him with her lateness and arrives running at the field. Before she can rejoice at the emperor's absence, she hears his voice behind her, displeased by her delayed awakening. Raniero is surprised by the girl's bow, which reminds him of a child's toy. but she explains that she still doesn't have the strength to pull the string. The Emperor gives her a bow suitable for her build, and it seems even lighter to her, and more comfortable than the previous one. After an hour of training, Raniero announces, for the 67th time, that Angelica could have died from the same attack. After 30 minutes of shooting at targets, the Emperor gets bored with the practice, so he brings wooden sabers and starts a fencing lesson. Without teaching her theory or fundamentals, he goes straight to Spartan training, claiming that the girl has too many weak points. Angelica is defeated again, and the Emperor is surprised that she cannot dodge any of his attacks. She explains that perhaps the problem is not with her, but with Raniero being too fast. Finally, the Emperor begins to explain the fundamentals of combat to her in detail. Although he murmured about her slow movements, he did not seem to intend to stop training. Angelica finds it incomprehensible that Raniero, whom everything bored, continued with the training. She thanks him for the teaching and promises to try hard, even if it takes time, and the Emperor. After a silence, he suddenly strokes her head. Although the Empire of Actilos is immense, rumors spread at the speed of light. Nothing has been officially announced, but the aristocrats are already whispering about the house festival. They also talk about how the Emperor took care of Angelica after her fainting spell, and then waited 2 hours for her on the track to train her personally. The maids of honor, naturally, are the ones spreading these rumors, but this even benefits the Empress, as it will reinforce her position. However, for someone planning to escape, public attention on her person is a burden. Now it is definitely necessary to show good relations with the Emperor, as someone else like Jax could appear. To show affection to the Empress, gifts are constantly sent to her from different regions of the Empire, and even from abroad. Angelica discovers that the construction of the house area will finish in 4 days, and she will soon be able to inspect it. She knows that, no matter how hard she tries, it will be difficult to win in a confrontation with the mother and the son of Jax. That's why Angelica wants to gather more information that will give her an advantage in this battle. As training continues, Raniero begins to distrust the human brain. Doubting her sword skills, Angelica thinks she should practice running. After a brief silence, the Emperor decides to take the young woman to inspect the house area. Seeing the prepared area, Angelica once again confirmed that Raniero is used to doing things with great resources. If she is in the tower, she will get a good view and advantage when using the bow. The Emperor wants the young woman to know that he did a lot for her comfort, and she thanks him. From then on, Angelica met Raniero every morning and practiced shooting. After training, until late at night, she prepared for the summer solstice celebration. Although she was worried that she hadn't seen Sylvia since that day, the Empress had no time to waste on other matters. One morning, Raniero brings Angelica a dress. He wants her to wear it to the party if she survives the hunt. Finally, the long-awaited Solstice Day event arrives. The hunt is scheduled for after lunch. Angelica approaches the imperial throne and asks Raniero if she is late. He laughs and tells the girl he has been waiting for her for 2 hours. Then he takes her hand and sits her on his lap. Sitting as if they were an adorable couple, they discuss the plan by which Angelica plans to move in the house area. The celebration begins, and Raniero, holding the girl's hand, greets those present. The festive lunch begins, but Angelica cannot swallow a bite due to great nervousness. Raniero brings her a glass whose contents are different from hers and offers her a drink. He whispers in her ear to drink it all, and Angelica obediently empties the glass. She is scared. She doesn't understand what's in the drink, as her hands and feet immediately get hot. Raniero asks her to try to resist, and soon everything will be shown to her differently. He suddenly starts laughing and noticing the surprised looks of the guests. He asks them to enjoy lunch. They develop an intense appetite. She eats, and the taste of the food seems more intense than usual to her. After that drink, everything became strange. The girl's body sometimes became light and hot, sometimes heavy, and instead of getting nervous. Now she eagerly awaits the hunt. During the meeting, she receives a gift from Raniero: a deadly purified poison, obtained from the Cielo poisonous frog. The emperor asks to convey to the girl that he knows what to do with it. The empress appears. The guests greet her admiringly, and Angelica regrets that they cannot observe from the balcony. Looking at the hunting ground, where the prey is hiding, the young woman suddenly notices Sylvia next to her. She was trembling with excitement, repeating over and over to herself that everything would turn out well. The compassion Angelica felt weeks ago seeing Sylvia kneeling now seems like a deception to her. If the young woman fulfills her task well, she will be entitled to a reward, but if she fails, it won't matter anymore. The emperor joins them, repeating again that Angelica will not die, and once again ignores the question about what was added to her glass. The start of the hunt is announced, and the empress feels an impatient desire to immediately go out to the field. After pre-coating the arrows with the poison gifted by Raniero, Angelica takes her place in the watchtower and concentrates on the sounds. Suddenly, a crunching sound is heard from below. But upon aiming, the empress notices that it is Sylvia. The young woman wants to say something to Angelica. But at that moment, the Marchioness of Yaxi approaches her from behind and grabs her daughter by the hair. With a look full of rage, she anticipates tearing her heart out of her chest to give it to the emperor. The woman hopes that in this way she will obtain Raniero's grace, while Angelica aims at her from the tower. The empress shoots but misses, and realizing where the arrow came from, the Marchioness looks at the young woman with hatred. Taking advantage of her mother being distracted, Sylvia lunges at her and knocks her to the ground. Grabbing a stone from the ground and restraining the Marchioness, the young woman, as if driven mad by the desire to live, deals blow after blow to her head. Descending from the tower, Angelica regrets that Raniero did not see this scene. Kneeling before the empress, Sylvia offers to claim the prey as her own. Angelica tells the young woman she appreciates her, and drawing a dagger, slits the Marchioness's throat. At that moment, Henry appears from behind the trees, stunned by his mother's death. The empress aims at the marquis, who trembles with fury, and the arrow passes wide although it hits his shoulder. Suddenly, Angelica feels intense pain in her muscles, as if they were about to tear apart. And she falls. Henry is already raising his axe over the girl, but then Raniero appears behind him and pierces him with his sword. Approaching Angelica, he smiles and explains about the remedy she took. It gives her strength to overcome her physical limits, boosts her morale, and eliminates fear. However, it overwhelms the body, and its effect ends suddenly, so it is not usable in combat. Raniero puts the anesthetic in his mouth, kisses Angelica, and transmits the remedy through his lips. The pain subsides, and the emperor shows the young woman the prey she hunted. Smiling, he announces a reception in honor of the new empress. Stepping out onto the castle balcony, Raniero announces to the assembled crowd that Angelica hunted the prey by herself. The people fall to their knees before the emperor and the empress, and the young woman realizes again that the inhabitants of this country adore power. The festive night begins, and upon entering the hall, Angelica takes her place next to Raniero. Since the first dance of the party must be performed by the emperor, he and Angelica stand up to dance. Suddenly, the young woman feels her balance shift and falls, but she doesn't take the hand Raniero offers her. As she falls, Angelica hits hard, and the emperor smiles seeing that she didn't make a mistake even now. If she had taken the extended hand, she would have touched his body without permission, which is not allowed. To Angelica's surprise, Raniero leans down and, taking her in his arms, places her back on the throne. In the hall, as they greet the imperial couple, Sylvia appears, and the guests begin to whisper that the young woman has no shame. One of the aristocrats demands that the Marchioness's daughter be expelled from the imperial hall. But Angelica warns that the young woman, to prove her loyalty, sacrificed her own mother. The empress believes that Sylvia could be even more loyal than he himself, the emperor's aide. Hearing her arrogant tone, Raniero begins to laugh. He finds her way of speaking interesting and amusing. Following the emperor, everyone starts to laugh, and Angelica feels that everyone is laughing by force. Like puppets. Addressing the emperor, Sylvia asks for the prize he had promised her. As promised, Raniero names the young woman as the empress's lady-in-waiting. for which she thanks him. In reality, the appointment as a maid could have been obtained after the party. But Sylvia did it ostentatiously in front of the aristocrats. By receiving it personally from Raniero here, she showed that she is now the Empress's representative. And no one can ignore her. Exhausted from so much interaction with people in the hall, Angelica went out to the courtyard and sat by the fountain. The young woman immediately stood up upon noticing the emperor approaching her. Holding a flower in his hand, he pointed out that, despite expectations, she seemed as if nothing had happened. Despite having killed someone, while saying that a weak person would be trembling now after killing another. He adorned her hair with the flower. Indeed, although it was in self-defense, Angelica is now a murderer. But she understands that the blame will change nothing. The young woman thanked Raniero for appearing in time and killing Henry, because otherwise she would be dead now. The emperor administered a preparation to Angelica so that her behavior would generate an interesting spectacle. Although Raniero knew the side effects, he felt no guilt as everything followed the plan. One after another. But he could not imagine how the Empress would react, if she would feel guilty or flee terrified. However, Angelica, whom he believed incapable of attending the banquet, appeared unflustered in the dress Raniero had given her. And at that moment, he felt a slight tremor, as if seeing for the first time the face she wore. It seemed strange to the emperor. He smiled sweetly, extended his hand to her, and offered to return. Upon entering the castle, the young woman was surprised to see Raniero taking her to his part of the castle. They entered a large room, a secret space of the emperor, forbidden even to servants. Raniero takes off his shirt and, approaching the surprised Angelica, kisses her. Then he gets into the hot tub in the room and calls her toward him. Putting her feet in the water, Angelica wonders why the emperor shows her this place that no one knows. Tired of her shyness, Raniero grabs her leg and throws her into the water. Confused, she doesn't know how to act, and when the emperor, affectionately calling her Angie, allows her to touch him, she hugs him. Raniero takes Angelica to bed, and they spend the night together. The girl falls asleep, and the emperor thinks she has become bolder, as she didn't ask permission to sleep. Now the Empress is a person of Actilos recognized by everyone, and from tomorrow, everyone will treat her differently. The fact that, after training for only a month, she defeated experts in Actilos martial arts means she has great potential. Suddenly, in her sleep, Angelica begins to moan. It sounds like she is drowning. Lifting her head, Raniero gives her mouth-to-mouth resuscitation and then kisses her, but she bites his lip while asleep. The Empress opens her eyes with tears. She dreamed that a decapitated prey was chasing her with an axe. The girl is afraid, her whole body trembles, and she clings to Raniero, who hugs her to comfort her. At dawn, Angelica sleeps so deeply that the Emperor had to repeat her name several times to wake her up. He is annoyed by her disobedience and orders her to wash and prepare to apologize. Angelica finds it uncomfortable to have breakfast in the main palace, especially under the serious gaze and heavy of the emperor. The young woman asks permission to leave for home after breakfast, but Raniero smiles and points out that this is her home. She justifies her hesitation with lack of sleep, but the emperor thinks Angelica rested very well. Besides, the girl must return to her wing of the castle, as Sylvia will arrive at the Empress's palace today. Noticing a cut on Raniero's lips and learning that she was the one who caused it, she cannot believe it, since if she had harmed the emperor, she would be dead. Accepting this, he highlights the seriousness of her offense, for which the young woman must face the corresponding punishment. Since the Empress wants to return to her territory, Raniero decides not to let her go as punishment. In the morning, the emperor reviews letters. At noon, he has meetings, and at night, he does physical exercises, standing by his desk. Angelica wonders if she will manage to escape during his official meetings. Realizing she has been standing all morning, Raniero orders a servant to bring a chair so the Empress can sit next to him. Opening another envelope, the emperor discovers a letter from the Tunia Temple. The Tunia Temple is an abandoned sanctuary in a barren land to the northwest. The letter mentions that only believers in the God of mercy remain there, who ceded all fertile land to the world. and only left rough things to their descendants. Currently, there is some tension between Actilos and the Kingdom of Zambinia. Raniero feels boredom reading repetitive letters asking for help. Turning to Angelica, he notices she has fallen asleep again, and approaching, he begins to shake her by the shoulders to wake her up. Upon waking, the young woman confesses to feeling uncomfortable doing nothing, and asks permission to at least read the letters she has already reviewed. Of course, the Empress has the right to know the state of state politics. But it seems premature to Raniero. Ignoring her question, he turns his back and continues working in silence, leaving Angelica to wonder what upset him. The Emperor notices her fear and confusion, and is so amused that he decides to maintain this attitude. Finally, Raniero took Angelica with him throughout the day, to lunch, to meetings, and even to the night training session. Only after all that did the Empress manage to break free and return to her room, surrounded by the attention of the maids. She planned to organize a party for Sylvia to celebrate her appointment as lady-in-waiting. But today she couldn't do it because of Raniero. Duchess Nirma comments to Angelica how impressed she was with yesterday's hunt. According to her, His Majesty has become the mother of the state, whom everyone sincerely loves and eagerly awaits seeing. Now is the time for Angelica to resume the postponed dance, and Nirma confesses to having spread a rumor among the social circles. She communicated the need to show the Empress sincere loyalty in advance. Although, according to Nirma, the opportunity to meet the ruler at the beginning of next month, not everyone will have. After studying the palace schedules, Angelica will be ready to debut. Then she will rule the imperial family, and the maid will do her best to help her. The young woman has barely finished her solstice tasks and now has to deal with new ones. She doesn't know how or when, with so much occupation, she will finally manage to tackle the escape plan. There are 15 days left until the party, and during all that time, Angelica has been studying with Duchess Nirma. Without realizing how quickly it passed, the young woman memorized the names of the aristocrats in the capital, their family relationships, and details about their business. Surprising her studying, Raniero takes the book from her and ironically points out how interesting her reading is. Sitting next to her on the bed, he affirms that they are forcing him to do unnecessary things, and throws the book aside. The Emperor explains that, with her position, she only needs to raise her chin and speak with a disdainful smile. She is not obliged to know or want to know the names of those who greet her, but he will listen with condescension. Raniero advises her to master the situation. After all, she is the Empress. He sees no reason why she shouldn't be able to use his method and act in her own style. Raniero suggests she start by learning to maintain her facial expression if she cannot follow his advice. A week later, on the day of the party, Sison informs Nirma that the event must be moved. Her Majesty's menstrual cycle is irregular, and she suffers intense pain, especially on the first day. The ladies-in-waiting begin to debate whether it is appropriate to hold the event, but Angelica interrupts the discussion. She decides not to move the party and asks for painkillers to be brought to her. Despite the intense pain, the Empress regains composure and prepares to face the aristocracy. Before the guests waiting for her, she thanks them for their visit and hopes they feel proud of this opportunity. And always think about what they can do for the Empress. The ladies and madams present at the reception were chosen by Duchess Nirma, an ambitious woman. Suddenly, Angelica realizes with horror that she has confused the names and lineages of these people. She thinks about how Raniero would act in this situation and remembers his advice. The guests are petrified, hearing the Empress claim not to know who they are or what they do. Choosing a woman from the crowd, Angelica arrogantly asks her to stand up and introduce herself briefly. The Empress pities Duchess Nirma, but she cannot ruin her image by showing weakness. The guests, one by one, begin to introduce themselves, and smiling, she expresses her joy in meeting them. Nirma is clearly annoyed because the social party did not go as planned. Angelica asks her why. Instead of worrying about the Empress's health, she looks at her reproachfully. The Duchess apologizes, stating she had no such intention. Nurm is a very cunning woman. That is why the Empress must set boundaries to prevent her from getting too familiar. The guests greet the Emperor upon seeing him enter, which surprises Angelica. Turning towards those present and lifting her in his arms, he announces his intention to kidnap her from this event. Raniero thinks his wife will enjoy his company more than the boring pastime with these people. His attitude showed absolute contempt towards his confused guests and towards the ladies-in-waiting who were responsible for concluding the reception. This surprises and disconcerts, as for the first time Angelica seems pleased with her husband. Meeting Sylvia on the way, Raniero tells her about the Empress's poor health and rejects the girl's offer to accompany her to her room, preferring to take her himself. Angelica perceives that the Emperor is becoming more indulgent with her every day. Sylvia leaves the room to find a painkiller, while Raniero brings a chair to the bed and sits down next to her. He thinks Angelica must have a very high opinion of herself to appear in that state in front of people. She apologizes, and Raniero points out that she was lucky that there were only fools there. Angelica jumps out of bed upon remembering that it is time to meet to discuss state matters. It turns out that Raniero did not attend the meeting, convinced that it was not worth discussing for long. When asking about today's topic, Angelica discovers that it was about the Temple of Twinia, a barren land with little influence, whose mountain range did not catch the attention of Actilos. The romance mentioned that Twinia used to ask for the relaxation of relations between the two countries, Actilos and Zambinia. According to Raniero, it is time for the demonic animals to hatch and for them to be exterminated. The Emperor finds it inconsistent to ask for compassion for such brutal destruction. Angelica hopes that Raniero will finally accept the expedition, since he likes blood bubbles. But he has not yet made a decision. The Emperor offers the girl the opportunity to personally bow her head at his feet, and perhaps thus show mercy. Angelica wonders what will happen if the temple sends emissaries, including Serafina. She tries to push those ideas out of her mind, because if everything follows the original script, the goddess will not arrive. And her meeting with Raniero will take place in winter. But what if the moment Serafina appears has also changed? Just like Angelica and Raniero, have they gotten closer than what happened in the original storyline? Although quite some time has passed, the social party was not repeated, since the Empress's entire attention was focused on the Temple of Twinia. Although Angelica knows that Serafina will not come, she cannot stop worrying and looks for more information about the temple. Because if these two cross paths sooner and the romance plot advances, the young woman will lose her life before winter. Suddenly, Angelica finds information about Saint Twinia, the most precious existence in religious society. It is mentioned there that the saint does not leave the temple's mountain peaks and does not maintain contact with the outside world. However, that is all she managed to find, although she vaguely suspected that Twinia would have some influence. However, there are many more stories about demonic creatures in the books. It turns out that the inhabitants of the Tunilla Mountain pass hunt and eat them when there is a severe food shortage. When the reproduction period arrives in these beasts' lands, the adult animals, due to the food shortage, they attack human lands. If Raniero travels to subdue the creatures, upon crossing the mountain pass, he will meet Serafina. Therefore, Angelica decides that she must also leave with the Emperor on this hunt. And if it happens that Raniero meets a goddess at that moment, she will flee from there immediately. The day of the temple delegation's arrival comes, and Angelica is very worried. Raniero, who found her in the hallway, wonders why the Empress skipped breakfast. The young woman, fearing a stomach ache from the nerves, confesses that she feels unwell. Raniero advises her not to meet the emissaries. Suddenly, Angelica grabs the Emperor by the sleeve and, apologizing, insists on letting her grant them an audience. Raniero agrees, and they head to the hall where the meeting with the delegation is scheduled. Angelica is surprised to see that the Archbishop of Tunis himself has come to the audience. Furthermore, among the emissaries in front of the imperial couple is the temple's Holy Knight, Eden, Serafina's first love. The Holy Knight's Order of the Spine gathers its strongest warriors. who oppose the demonic beasts. Although Eden is not a very important character, he is a rising star who reached the top thanks to his innate martial arts skills. In the original, due to Serafina, whom he always longed for, he was killed by Raniero. The Emperor is interested in whether the petitioners seeking his help brought a worthy tribute for him. Before the bishop can answer, Raniero interrupts him and announces that he will be merciful and will not accept the tribute presented. Instead, he orders them to kneel and beg to be saved. If the emissaries do not obey the emperor right now, they will have to return, and the temple's strength alone will not be enough. The bishop still hesitates, but Eden steps forward and kneels before Raniero, followed by the others. The emperor starts laughing, and Angelica thinks what a despicable pig he is. After the meeting, it seems strange to Angelica that Eden knelt down. In the original version, he is described as an honest knight with a rebellious spirit who does not conform to what he considers wrong. Angelica overhears the conversation of the maids, who praise Eden's training, which impressed them even more than the emperor. Since the temple emissaries stay in Acti for 9 days, the empress decides to give them adequate attention. On the way, she runs into Raniero, who got bored talking to the bishop and came to hug her. Angelica tells him her intentions to give instructions regarding the upcoming dinner. However, the emperor has already made the decisions and therefore does not need to bother. So she can return to the palace. Raniero walks with Angelica, wondering why lately she is so interested in the temple, putting aside the study of mundane society, in which he had tried so hard. He looked in the library for information about Tuanita. He even said that he wants to receive the delegation despite not feeling well. The Empress's native kingdom, Hanro, and the temple's backbone are far away, and they have no reason to trade with each other. Angelica asks Raniero who he decided to seat at the table during dinner, and he asks her how she planned to organize it. According to her, the archbishop, the commander of the Knights' Order, and the 2 elder priests should sit according to their rank. However, it seems boring to the emperor, that distribution of the guests. In reality, Angelica doesn't fully understand whom they consider most important, since she sees them all for the first time. If it had been 2 months ago, such an answer would have bored Raniero. But now it seems to him that the girl wants to sit opposite that night during dinner. Sitting on the bed, he calls her to him, happy about her compliance, although he wishes she would approach him first. That day, the Empress entrusted Sison with monitoring Eden, and now the lady-in-waiting informs her of what she has found out. It turns out that Eden was taking a book from the library, hiding it under his clothes, and heading to a place where no one was. Determined to check it herself, Angelica asks Sison to arrange for her not to attend the training. On the agreed day, the Empress sends Nurm to observe the practice along with the others. The Duchess refuses, as the hostess feels unwell and cannot leave her alone. Angelica convinces her that Sison's presence will be enough, and insists that she go entertain herself. She asks the maids to go report later on who won, and Nurm finally agrees. The Empress confirms with Sison if there is anyone in the library, and after getting an answer, she reassures the nervous lady-in-waiting. She leaves towards the library, and from behind the bushes, watches the path Eden would take if he went for the book again. Angelica was right in her assumption, as soon the knight appears, who passes without noticing her. She sticks her head out of her hiding place and stops Eden, telling him that he will not be able to find the materials he is looking for, whatever they may be. He explains that he is not looking for anything specific, just exploring, as he loves books. Angelica asks him to say his name, but he affirms that he has no other name besides Eden. The girl, fearing she might have been wrong in her assumptions, insists that if he doesn't answer, it would be better for him to leave here. Staring at her, the boy suddenly confesses that his name is actually Chester. Confirming that her suspicions were correct, Angelica asks him about the book they both clearly entered. It turns out that they both transferred to the book on the same day, May 18th. The girl, who thought this had only happened to her, starts to cry and confesses to having ordered her maid to follow him. The boy is happy to meet her, as he also didn't believe anyone else was in the same situation as him. Now he understands how Angelica understood him, as her actions deviate greatly from the book she read. Since they have little time to talk, the girl immediately asks Eden about the book he read in the library. According to him, it is a book about forbidden magic, as he believes that is why he arrived in this world. Angelica has read many novels of this genre, in which the plot is based on transfers to other worlds. That is why she never considered it from that perspective, nor wondered why or how she ended up here. From the girl's words, Eden deduces that the Emperor is not one of the transferred ones. If he were, she would be happy, as Raniero is just as crazy as in the original. And every day she has to walk on a tightrope. Eda does not understand why there are two of him and of Angelica, and both are secondary heroes who died in the original. The boy plans to remove magic from himself and return to where he lived before. However, Angelica knows that most heroes in similar novels about transfers do not return to their original world. Raniero watches the friendly combat in practice with boredom, occasionally looking at Angelica's empty throne. Tired of boredom, he gets up and goes to the Empress's palace, where he is received by Sison, who is confused by his arrival. Entering Angelica's room, Raniero approaches the bed, pushes back the blanket, and discovers that she is not in bed. With an evil look, he orders the maid, who is trying to defend her mistress, to shut up. Raniero noticed that a knight was missing from the practice. Angelica visited him under the pretext of an illness. The girl asks Chester if he has seen Serafina, if she lives in the Temple of Tuni. However, the boy admits that he does not know her at all, as he constantly avoids her. Angelica is surprised by this confession, as the memories of the heroes are transmitted to them over time. And Eden should know Serafina. Chester confesses that the feelings of his body's owner are so strong that he himself is influenced by them. However, despite having only a distorted image, he still believes that Eden truly hates Serafina. Angelica is shocked, as she always assumed there were mutual feelings between the knight and the goddess. Chester explains that Eden always prioritized rule and morality, and considered it unacceptable to be attracted to a holy knight. The boy plans to go on a mission to destroy demonic beasts, as he wants to see the large library of an abandoned temple. Unable to find clues through normal methods, he decides to take risks, as he is on the border between beasts and humans. Angelica promises to search for necessary information in the Imperial Library. She promises to find him in Tunis if she discovers anything, and he is surprised to learn that she also plans to go subdue. To avoid problems, they decide to end the conversation, as it is convenient for Angelica to return before the friendly sparring ends. Relieved to have returned alive and unharmed, the girl enters the palace. However, she suddenly stops, as in the center of the room, sitting in a chair. Raniero waits for her. The Emperor, with a malicious smile, asks why she took a walk if she felt unwell. Angelica explains that she went out for air because her head hurt terribly. Noticing that her hands were trembling, something that did not go unnoticed by Raniero, she mentions that she fears his intimidating gaze. The Emperor asks if she met that night, and Angelica denies it, asking if perhaps he suspects something about her. Raniero is surprised at being vulnerable, nervous because those two specifically did not attend training today. Even if that man likes his wife, he has no reason to be angry, as the Emperor cannot feel jealous of an aunt like her. Angelica starts crying, admitting that she cannot lie to the Emperor. He approaches her and kneels, hugging her, which surprises her greatly. However, she seems so fragile, and knowing that showing his anger would scare her again. The Emperor says he is not angry. It was the first time Raniero was able to completely deceive Angelica. In a relationship where both know each other little, a small twist began to occur. When the Emperor left, Angelica finally let her emotions run free. Because she had been very scared, thinking her end had come. She cannot believe he was so angry about her absence, when for him, she is nothing more than an insignificant prey. There must be another reason. For now, she decides not to disappear from Raniero's sight for a while. The Emperor is by his wife's side, chatting with the knights, and Eden and Angelica act as if they do not know each other. The girl is already annoyed by this endless chatter and asks the emperor to leave. But he suddenly hugs her gently. When asked the emperor how everyone slept, the knight replies that they had a comfortable night. And quiet. While continuing to stroke Angelica's hair, Raniero asks if the knights like the food. Eden is surprised by the emperor's displays of tenderness. As the girl had told him, he was just as crazy as in the original. Angelica is also surprised and scared by Raniero's behavior, who suddenly decides to kiss the empress in front of everyone. As he kisses her, he glances at Eden, and the knight feels uncomfortable with his gaze. The girl asks him to stop, as it is time for the knights to leave. And Raniero agrees, telling everyone that he clearly cannot wait to be alone with her. Now, Angelica has no doubt that the emperor suspects something about her, as he looked at Eden so fixedly. Through Saizen, she delivers a letter to the knight asking what to do, since the emperor might have guessed their conversation. Upon receiving Chester's reply, who says he doesn't think so, Angelica gets angry, since the boy is not that smart. Observing her mistress, Saizen thinks about how she has changed since living in the kingdom of Hanro. When they decided to send her to the Empire of Actilos for marriage, Saizen felt sorry for the princess, who cried nonstop. The maid opted to live far away, refusing marriage. But Angelica, now empress, seems like another person to her. Saizen decides to tell her mistress about her concerns, but she barely wants to say a word when Angelica interrupts her. She understands that the maid thinks she feels something for the knight from the Temple of Tunia. It pains her to have made Saizen doubt, but she assures her that things are not as they seem. With tears in her eyes, the girl asks why, in that case, Angelica doesn't tell her anything, as it wasn't like this before. Seeing her tears, the empress explains that she feels nothing for the knight, but that her interest lies with the saint of the Temple of Tunia. However, Sisson does not understand why Angelica decided to ask Eden about the saint, since she could have spoken with the archbishop. The empress replies that she did it because it seems to her that Eden has no friends at all. Besides, she thought someone who doesn't feel belonging to the temple would say more than the archbishop. Upon hearing Angelica's explanation, Sisson is happy and wiping away her tears. She apologizes for not understanding her at first. The empress affirms that she has no intention of betraying her husband. And these words are heard by Raniero, who is on the other side of the door. He smiles, as knowing that Angelica is very close to her maid, he does not doubt that what she just said is true. Sisson is happy about the harmony between the couple, as her mistress was crying not long ago, refusing to marry. And now she has adapted her life very well and has become a respected empress. Angelica admits that it is difficult, but it seems to her that His Majesty treats her quite well. Upon hearing this, Raniero smiles again, while Sisson expresses her hope that over time the empress will love this country even more. Angelica also hopes so, provided, of course, she doesn't die during the winter hunt. The emperor is amused that the young woman worries about the winter hunt, as he himself has completely forgotten about it. Recalling that Angelica is interested in the saint of the temple, he thinks it would be good to meet her when he goes on the expedition. At night, lying on the empress's lap, Raniero senses her good mood. The young woman points out that the cause is the emperor's good humor, which cheers her up. They both laugh at Angelica's comedy, for whom such joy is strange. Raniero places the palm of the young woman on his head, and she, following the movement, begins to stroke it. The emperor asks Angelica what else she likes, and she doesn't understand why. Suddenly, her preferences interest him. The empress decides to ask Raniero to allow her to join him on the expedition to eradicate demonic creatures. She understands that her request might seem strange to him, as she is very easily frightened, and nevertheless, she asks to delve into the middle of the bloody actions. However, Raniero suddenly accepts her request with a smile, as she wants to follow him. Angelica is surprised. It is the first time she has seen such an expression on the emperor. After all, he had always presented himself as a devil, and his essence seemed demonic until now. But now his face is so harmless and radiant that she reaches out and gently touches his cheek. Angelica understands that she must not deceive herself. After all, this man can become dangerous at any moment. But he hugs her tightly. She understands that he is not constant and that tomorrow he will be the Raniero she knows. But for now, she hugs him too. However, tomorrow comes, and contrary to Angelica's expectations, the emperor does not return to his former appearance. The archbishop thanks the king for the reception offered, during which the members of the delegation rested well. Seeing off the ambassadors, the emperor smiles again and hugs Angelica. The young woman is shocked, as in a moment the fearsome Raniero Actilos begins to behave like a romantic novel protagonist. If analyzed objectively, it is good that he is kind, but Angelica cannot take him seriously. It was only last spring, when they got married, that she hated even contact. But now he constantly asks her what she likes. Lying in bed, she wonders if she will manage to flee before Raniero's interest in her wanes. Meanwhile, drinking wine, the emperor reflects on why she doesn't directly tell him her preferences. A few days ago, after overhearing Angelica's conversation with the maid, he felt a burning desire. He can count on one hand the moments when she smiles, and he wants to see her smile broadly. He understood that he wants to possess that woman and that she loves him. Angelica is in the library, and upon seeing the leaves falling through the window, she remembers that in a week she will leave on an expedition. During all this time, she has read almost all the works related to magic. But in none do people from another world appear. Supposedly, as Eden said, there is no other remedy than to go to the large abandoned book storage of the sanctuary. Raniero enters the library, sits next to Angelica, and asks her if there is anything she wishes to see on the expedition. When she replies that she is not looking for anything specific, the emperor inquires about the saint who never leaves the Temple of Tuni. The young woman shudders. She doesn't understand why Raniero is so interested. Does he want to see Serafina? The emperor is surprised by her reaction. He thought Angelica would be happy to talk about a topic that interests her. Smiling, he asks, what is wrong with him wanting to see the saint? But the young woman suddenly tries to dissuade them. She doesn't understand why he insists so much, and Angelica explains that Serafina is very beautiful, which could be a problem for her. When asked how she dares to monopolize him, the young woman, frightened, tries to excuse herself, saying that she misunderstood. However, Raniero suddenly smiles. He likes Angelica's possessive attitude towards him. 10 days later, the expedition to eradicate the demonic beasts began. Raniero rides, but Angelica, despite knowing this, was put in a carriage. The empress took only Sison and Sylvia with her, as having the minimum number of servants is better for escaping in an emergency. They say Angelica took Sylvia as a trophy. That is why, while her reputation grew, the young woman's fell. Although the empress acts, the lady-in-waiting will not be able to tell anyone, because no one would listen to the voice of a weak girl. After 3 uninterrupted days of travel, the doors of the litter open and Raniero orders Angelica to get out. The camp is not set up yet, so she doesn't understand why he summoned her. Taking her hand, he asks if she likes something beautiful, and upon receiving a yes, he takes her. Or someplace. As they enter the forest, Raniero asks if it is true that people like her consider something that shines beautiful. Angelica is paralyzed by an indescribable beauty. The land, illuminated by night stars, is covered with sparkling flowers. She cannot believe how the emperor managed to find such a wonderful place and asks him to smile if he likes it. It seems like she is dreaming. She approaches Raniero, stands on tiptoes, and hugs him. He gives her a kiss and repeats her name several times softly. Raniero throws Angelica to the ground, and the girl understands that, if he brought her here so she would smile, it is because he cares about her feelings. Upon finally arriving at Tunia, the emperor is received by the archbishop, whom he orders to prepare beds for everyone. Raniero will personally take care of the food and clothing for his men, but asks them to take care of the accommodation for him and his wife. As she surveys the mountain ridge of the Temple of Tunia, Angelica sees abandoned villages nearby. A large column of newcomers passes through the street, but no resident comes out to see it. The empress suddenly feels a new awareness that people see Actilos as an object of fear. A meeting with the commander of the Holy Knights Order is scheduled for Raniero, and he asks if Angelica will join him. She refuses, and the Emperor, without hiding his sorrow, strokes her head upon parting. Raniero has definitely changed, and Angelica has no choice but to accept that she really likes this man. However, who knows, perhaps when he meets Serafina, everything will change. That is why she must be careful. Angelica told Sison to bring a bag of money, but she doesn't want to escape right now. At that moment, Eden, approaching from behind, grabs the girl and covering her mouth. He signals her with his finger not to scream in fear. Upon letting her go, he apologizes for scaring her, and Angelica asks him where Serafina is, and if she can meet her. However, Eden has taken measures to prevent it, as if the original events begin earlier. It could also be a problem for him. He suggested to the Archbishop to send Serafina on a trip, as the visit of a saint could be a support for those who worry about the house. Angelica, pleased by his mental speed, in turn spoke about her failure to find the necessary literature. The existing world is not described in any story, nor are there even tales of souls who have changed bodies. Although Eden thinks they have no choice but to visit the abandoned library of the sanctuary, Angelica decides not to show her skepticism about it. She announces that she will leave with the Emperor on the hunt, as His Majesty wishes. Angelica confesses to Eden that she thinks she likes Raniero, but he is not surprised, since he knew it. However, Angelica is worried, as this turn clearly differs from the original. Eden asks her if she will stay here, although after meeting Serafina, Raniero may lose interest in her. Angelica remains silent, and she barely wants to say something when Eden interrupts her, considering that this answer is enough for him. Angelica is embarrassed to show him this state, because she is very excited thinking that she likes Raniero. Taking her hand, Eden says he will understand if she wants to stay, as the situation here might be better for her than there. Angelica promises the boy that she will help him return, even if she decides to stay here herself. Eden smiles and says it's better for them to part and not see each other anymore. Sitting at dinner, Angelica wonders if the changed Raniero will continue to appreciate her or, upon seeing Serafina, he will fall in love. She doesn't know if she can be sure that, even overcoming the obstacles, she won't be disappointed in him. Seeing the narrow bed made just for her, Angelica realizes that she regrets it. Does she really want to stay here? Because if she is honest with herself, she wasn't that happy in that life. She was so poor that cheap books were her only entertainment. And she didn't even have friends. While Angelica was a princess, educated and raised with love, she also has her faithful friend, Sison. But since there is no guarantee that Raniero will always love her, from a rational point of view, the most sensible thing for her is to leave. The Emperor appears in the doorway, bringing food for Angelica because she skipped dinner. He sits next to her and begins to feed her. And she notices that Raniero brought exactly what she likes to eat most. Angelica wishes him luck for tomorrow, but secretly thinks she won't be able to fully accept him, until the fear disappears. When she finishes eating, Raniero notices that the bed is very narrow, barely one body can fit on it. He approaches Angelica and begins to kiss her, but she, feeling that her heart might burst, suddenly pushes him away. Raniero looks at her surprised, and the gesture on his face shocks her. She cannot believe she rejected someone who perhaps has never been dismissed by anyone in his life. Aware that she must fix things quickly before he gets angry, Angelica pretends it was a joke. She apologizes for her mistake and asks him not to get angry. But Raniero replies calmly that he is not angry. He hugs her gently and asks her not to be afraid or whine. Her heart beats wildly. She cannot believe that Raniero is not upset. He settles her on his knees and, since the journey was exhausting, suggests she rest and sleep. A woman with her face covered by a veil approaches Angelica, handing her a tray. Upon opening it, the Empress sees a head on the tray and thinking it is Jacques. She moves away scared. The head rolls away and turns out to be Eden, who asks Angelica if she will stay there. Moving backward, she realizes that the veiled young woman is Serafina, who stares at her coldly. As she moves away from her, she falls into the arms of Raniero, who is right there and calls her his winter prey. Serafina seems to want to say something to Angelica, but she cannot make out her words. She hears herself being called and, opening her eyes, sees the agitated emperor asking her to recover. Angelica realizes that she had a nightmare, and it seems strange to her that in the dream she wanted to face death. Looking in the mirror in the morning, she understands why Raniero gripped her wrists tightly. Because if he hadn't stopped her, the mark on her neck could have been even worse. Today is the day they are heading to the sanctuary, so Angelica decides to prepare herself. And forget that dream. Upon going out to the courtyard, the young woman converses with the archbishop, and at that moment Raniero appears asking if he can travel with them. It turns out that the expedition will last 2 weeks, even if the sanctuary is nearby, as the group must eliminate the beasts. If she thinks about it, by staying here, Angelica might have enough time to explore the cathedral without Raniero's surveillance. So, explaining that her slow pace might hinder the journey, she announces her decision to stay. Taking Raniero's hand, she tells him she wants to finish there as soon as possible and return to his palace with him soon. He moves away from her, letting go of her hand and promising her that he will return as soon as possible. Angelica requests permission from the archbishop to inspect the sanctuary, which she read so much about when she recovered. The knights set off, and Eden perceives the emperor's grim gesture. He is surprised that Raniero's emotions were hurt by not having left with them for the hunt. Eden cannot believe that Angelica has tamed the emperor so much as to dare to go against his will. He now seems like a completely different person from the one described in the book. At that moment, the demons attack the knights, and they witness how Raniero destroys the entire pack in an instant. One of the beasts survives, but the emperor, drawing his sword, kills it with a single move. The further away Angelica gets, the more something awakens in Raniero. The group arrives at the sanctuary and discovers demonic beast eggs scattered around. With a buzzing smile, Raniero asks the knights if they have ever seen the birth of demonic beasts. He orders them to kill the newborn cubs, capture the mothers alive, and not touch the eggs. The emperor thinks Eden is crazy, since in this hellish battle, besides killing beasts, he also enjoys collecting eggs. When asked by a knight why they don't destroy the eggs right now, Raniero replies that it wouldn't be fun that way. One of the warriors informs the emperor that a cub has been born, but he didn't kill it. The cub did not attack, probably confusing the knight with its mother, and this greatly entertains Raniero. He orders them to collect the eggs and set up a guard, while Eden wonders who the real demon among them is. Eden, who is in line for the guard shift, examines the eggs and decides they will not hatch yet. So he opts to explore the area. Upon entering the library, he is disappointed to find it much smaller than he expected. He comes to the wall and sees a small, ajar stone door, behind which is a very narrow corridor. He checks that he will not be able to pass through the gap, and at that moment, he notices that something is written on the doorknob. The inscription indicates to break with the sword of Tuni when the blood of Actilos is ready. It probably refers to the blood of Raniero Actilos, Actilos' godson. But Eden does not understand what the sword of Tuni is, since such a relic does not exist. He decides to look for related documents in the warehouse, and at that moment, someone calls him from behind. The knight asks Eden what he is looking at on the empty wall, where there is nothing. And they leave. The second day after the punishment group retreated, news arrived that the sanctuary recovered sooner than expected. Angelica arrived at the infirmary upon learning that the wounded knights had returned first. Seeing the deep wounds on their bodies, the empress supposed that the operation to eliminate the beasts was very hard. The knight pointed out that the battle was not difficult, but Raniero's strategy surprised him. The emperor seized the beasts' eggs, and after hatching, the cubs took them for their parents. Afterward, Raniero ordered the hungry cubs to be fed their own mothers. Upon hearing this, Sylvia drops the jars with medicine and, trembling, kneels on the floor to pick them up. Entrusting Sison with taking care of the infirmary, Angelica goes out to bring water to the knights. And she takes Sylvia with her. The empress worries about the maid, but doesn't know how to tell her to go rest. since for a citizen of Actilos, it could be humiliating. Suddenly, the young woman asks Angelica why she worries so much about her, daughter of traitors, when she doesn't deserve it. Sylvia confesses that, upon hearing about the beasts, she remembered the moment her mother was a murderer in the house for her own survival. Placing her hand on the young woman's shoulder, Angelica asks her not to talk about it. And she, with tears in her eyes, hugs her shoulder. The protagonist smiles, because Sylvia showing herself weak means her total trust in the hostess. The next day, next to the archbishop, Angelica visited the recovered sanctuary. The empress asks if she can examine any book stored here, and the bishop gives her permission. With horror inside, she discovers that Chester was wrong, as all the forbidden works had already been moved, and only those that can be shown to outsiders remain. After that, Angelica entered the abandoned sanctuary every day. Reading the books was very difficult, since, although there were few, many were damaged, and the lines in them were erased. The empress stands next to the shelves, and suddenly, to her right, a book falls from the shelf by itself. Taking it in her hands, Angelica freezes in astonishment. It is exactly the novel she entered. Flipping through the book, the young woman notices that its content seems different from what she read before. According to the book, the pupil of war stole the sanctuary of mercy. The knights of Actilia face a storm and are forced to retreat. Seraphina hears the voice of God, announcing that an important guest will arrive soon. And she awaits him. Reading up to the moment of the empress's death, Angelique's stomach turns. Perhaps it is because she read the original after spending several months with Raniero. But it feels like something doesn't fit. Suddenly, Angelique discovers a note from the author, written specifically for her. According to the author, if there were immovable rules in the world he created, the pupil of Actilia would have no choice but to become possessed by Saint Tunia. Even if the surrounding characters and their conflicting relationships change, Raniero will inevitably meet Seraphina. And he will fall in love with her. Thinking it would be better to flee from the emperor, Angelique is startled when someone touches her shoulder. Turning around, Angelique sees Emperor Raniero in front of her, returning sooner than expected. He asks her what book she was reading, and upon hearing that it is the canonical rules, he is surprised to recall clearly hearing her curse under her breath. Raniero begins to flip through the book, and Angelique panics, not knowing how to explain to him. Suddenly, the emperor turns to her and asks if she is joking by calling it a decree, since in front of him there is only a blank page. He hands the book to the stunned Angelique and moves away from the sanctuary, asking her if she remembers what he said 10 days ago. He takes her hand, and the girl cannot believe that the emperor returned early because of her words about returning home. Sitting on Rodrigo's floor, Angelica asks him how the slaughter went. The emperor tells her how he fed the cubs with their mothers, lamenting that the young woman hadn't seen that scene. At night, Angelica cannot sleep, as the difficulty of escape increased when she finally understood that she liked Raniero. She will not be able to trick him. And if she suddenly moves away now, he will surely suspect something. As long as he doesn't leave for the winter expedition, she must love him sincerely so that he has no doubts that she might abandon her beloved. The next day, it turns out they are about to return. Angelica worries, since now she will not have time to talk to Chester about the book. The empress has no choice but to entrust that matter to Sison. Taking advantage of the moment when Raniero will overhear their conversation, she calls the lady-in-waiting and asks her to return the book that the empress accidentally left with her in the sanctuary. After finishing giving instructions, the emperor hugs Angelica, happy that they will soon be back home. Sison, upon meeting Eden, asks him to return the book that the empress took in the sanctuary. The lady-in-waiting also gives him the money they were carrying and informs him that the escape is planned for December. Along with Eden. In the book there is a message from Angelica about the author's name, which Raniero failed to read. Although the knight also sees nothing in the book. Eden asks that the empress be informed that the pages are blank, and suddenly, the maid asks him about his relationship with Angelica. The girl doesn't understand why the empress plans to flee with him in December if they are in a decent relationship. Eden is also surprised that Angelica decided to flee, as he believed she planned to stay in Actilos. Unable to convince Saizen, he explains the Empress's decision. They received a prophecy that the Emperor would kill them both. The lady-in-waiting finally understands the reason why her mistress frequently sent her to Eden. Saizen returns to Angelica to tell her about her conversation with the knight. Now, knowing the prophecy, the maid understands the Empress's decision and supports her. Angelica discovers that Eden also saw blank pages in the book, just like Raniero. Saizen comments on the secret door in the sanctuary that the knight found when inspecting the library. The lady-in-waiting goes to check the Empress's belongings, while Angelica wonders how it is possible that Eden doesn't see the annotations in the book. And she didn't see the door. Anyway, there is no time left to think. She and Raniero return to Actilos. Although Actilos led an unprecedented life of peace after returning from the extermination of the beasts, Angelica often suffered nightmares. Raniero woke her up every time and asked her what she was dreaming, but she naturally hid it. The Emperor knew she was lying, but for some reason he didn't question her, he only hugged her and calmed her down. Angelica noticed that lately Raniero was indulgent when she showed a little tenderness. The young woman asks him for permission to see the home they are preparing for Saizen tomorrow, and he agrees. But she must return before sunset. Saizen returns home, where she is met by the servants worried about their mistress's silence lately. The maid asks the butler how he manages to stay so calm when the mistress returns in a bad mood. The boy replies that the others should be less easily scared and goes to his room. Watching him walk away, the maid thinks about how peculiar he is. Among the employees, only he was assigned a room. His way of speaking is elegant, his actions noble, and it even seems to her that he could be a fallen aristocrat hiding his identity. But no one knows that he was actually a promising holy knight from the Temple of Tunia. And to keep him closer, the lady-in-waiting in whom His Majesty trusts the most became independent. All the mansion employees lack ties to the imperial palace. And all this is a smokescreen to avoid arousing suspicion. No one can imagine that the Empress, the maid, and the exiled holy knight are secretly planning an escape. When Eden communicated to Angelica through Saizen that he planned to travel to Actilos, she wondered how he planned to do it. In the temple, the knight confessed his sin, his love for the saint, and likewise caused his exile. Angelica understands how intensely Chester wishes to return to his original world. Fame and status here mean nothing to him. Lately, the Empress's mental state has clearly weakened due to the escape plan. However, Raniero, who knows she often has nightmares, no longer demands explanations for anything Angelica does. He didn't even consider Saizen's independence suspicious. That's why the girl thinks he won't suspect anything. Upon arriving at the lady-in-waiting's house, Angelica sits on the living room sofa while the girl closes the curtains. Eden enters the room with a tray, greeting the Empress whom he hadn't seen for a long time. Referring to her haggard appearance, Angelica replies that very little time is left before Rangero's expedition. The young man confesses that on that occasion, he didn't tell everything about the door he found. Eden wanted to tell everything in person after solving it himself. But first, he wants to talk about something else. Raniero is too overprotective of Angelica, and it seems to the young man that the Emperor will want to take her on the winter expedition. However, the Empress does not think so, as Raniero knows that after returning from the extermination, he feels very bad. Before the Emperor undertakes the expedition, she plans to tell him she wants to go for treatment, and that she will not oppose it. When Raniero leaves the palace, the escape will begin. But for now, Angelica has not decided on the destination. Countries neighboring Actilos have reinforced border surveillance, and crossing will not be easy. Raniero, distracted by Serafina, perhaps won't look for Angelica, but the owner of Fida. The place she chose for treatment could act differently. If the Empress is discovered, she will be sent back to the imperial palace immediately. Eden considers that for this reason they must go to a place near the border, with which Actilos maintains good relations. He proposes the Temple of Tunia as the place for treatment, and Angelica gets angry, as Raniero will be there. Eden asks her to calm down, as they will have to go to the temple anyway, since the door is in an ancient sanctuary. Angelica understands that he suggests they go to the temple first, before the emperor arrives there. Eden is sure that the priests who worship the god of mercy will not discover what they hide there. He tells the empress about the inscription carved on the knob of the sanctuary door. Eden reflects for a long time on which sword is mentioned in it, and finally reaches a conclusion that the girl guesses instantly. Actila's sword is probably Serafina, because in the original version, her sword pierced Raniero. They must communicate with the saint before the emperor so that, upon seeing the blood of Actila, take it to the warehouse and open the door, they can discover what is behind it. Angelica thinks sadly about the mentioned blood of Actila and assumes that anyway, Raniero must die. Eden does not understand if he necessarily has to die, but blood must be shed anyway. Noticing Angelica's concern, he asks if this causes her distress. Although called the guest of Actila, it is believed to be the same essence as God himself. Because unlike the god of Tuni, blood is the only means to communicate with the god of Actila. Without temples or sacred writings, Angelica fears that her negative response will be interpreted as a lie, but still affirms that her life is the most important thing to her. To Eden, who mentally perceives that the empress does not know how to lie, it seems that, finally. And after all, he loves her. The girl has no choice but to pretend that she is the one generating that appearance intentionally. She asks Eden not to worry, as she understands that his life is the most valuable. She believes time will show whether it is love out of necessity or an excuse she gives herself. Angelica decides to ask Eden if he belonged to a wealthy family, or at least, if he lived without complications. After all, it is possible that his previous life was a utopia for him, whereas for her the current one is extremely difficult. That is why she asks Eden to keep this in mind, pointing out that she hesitates, since returning is not as pleasant for her as it is for him. A month later, if the plot advances as expected, Raniero will leave on an expedition to the kingdom of Zambinia. Noticing the empress examining a map of that region, Sylvia informs her that the journey takes approximately 3 weeks. The maid finds it hard to believe that Angelica is studying maps for no apparent reason. The emperor enters the office, asking what they were talking about. Angelica explains to Raniero that she studied the maps to familiarize herself with the situation. Seating her at the table, he asks her to share her view on the situation in that region. In her opinion, winter is not exactly the best time for armed conflict. Angelica shows Zambinia, an area at the foot of the mountain, and it is actually the only path connecting them to Actilos. If Actilos uses it as a support point, it means its soldiers will be directly delivered into the hands of Zambinia. Angelica knows that in that place far from the capital, it will be difficult to deploy many soldiers in winter. And Raniero is impressed by her knowledge. The young woman points out that logic tells her there will be no war in winter, even if the borders are weaker than usual. If they take advantage of the opportunity to tear down the wall and dismantle the mountain to create a wider road, Actilos will be able to defeat the Zambinian forces one after another. The inhabitants of Actilos are born strong and resilient, so if they advance in winter, there is a high probability of achieving a decisive victory. Raniero admits that he waited several years, during which he observed the weather conditions, and waited for the best moment. He is sure that if this winter is like the previous ones, this land will belong to Actilos. However, Raniero has never discussed it with Angelica and wonders where she gets so much information from. The young woman explains that she understood it by reasoning as the emperor does. He shows Angelica the planned route, which is scheduled for early December. When she sadly mentions that the emperor will soon be busy, he asks if she should leave. Hugging him, she promises him that everything will be fine and asks him to return soon. Raniero admits he would like to take Angelica, but she remembers that after the previous expedition, she got sick. The route of the expedition that the emperor showed today is valuable information, that will leave the palace through Sison and reach Eden's room. The emperor overhears the lively conversation of the maids and learns through Angelica that Duchess Narma will soon have a child. Without congratulating her, Raniero throws everyone out of the empress's room and lies down on her bed. Hearing Angelica's joy about Narma's expected pregnancy, the emperor wonders if she would like to have a child. He observes that if he decides to have children, there must be many for Actila's examination. Angelica wonders if the children she has must kill each other until only one remains. Upon receiving an affirmative answer, she deduces that her son could kill Raniero, just as he himself killed the previous emperor. However, the emperor is sure that no one can kill him, as in Actilos they disregard the weak, even if they are children. Angelica asks if she too could be disregarded, but Raniero points out that she is part of his family, and that the decision about her life or death depends only on his jurisdiction. If someone besides him takes his wife's life, he will pay for his blatant audacity. Sylvia overhears the conversations of other maids, talking about the harmony between the emperor and his empress. Since the emperor visited Angelica again, they will not look for the lady-in-waiting on duty until dawn. So Sylvia understands that this is her chance and must act right now. The independence of the first lady-in-waiting and the fact that she moved her residence outside the palace seems suspicious to her. So Sylvia decides to approach Sison's house to find something out. But upon arriving there, she realizes she was too late. In front of the house, she sees a light in the window, towards which Eden suddenly approaches. Although his new hairstyle might confuse someone, Sylvia recognizes the knight from the temple of Tunia in him. Drawing back the curtain, Eden hastily knocks on Suzanne's room door to announce that one of the empress's maids is waiting outside. The boy understands that a problem has arisen as their eyes met. It was clear that Sylvia had recognized him. Eden and Sison go out to the street to receive the young woman, who apologizes to them for the night visit. Upon entering, she confesses that she suspected something strange and came here following her instinct. Since instead of organizing social parties, Angelica studies maps of the area, Sylvia decides that they are forming an alliance. The girl wants them to tell her their plans, but Eden insists that he has no hidden intention. Eden explains that he is here because he was exiled from the temple and was lucky to find work. However, Sylvia doesn't believe a single word and wants to hear the truth. She decides to reveal her cards first and tells them that she does not plan to hinder anything the mistress has planned. Sylvia confesses that she hates the emperor, as for him all human beings are just toys. What is entertainment for him to relieve monotony? For her is a scream she will have to carry with her all her life. Therefore, if Angelica wants to betray the emperor, Sylvia is willing to sacrifice her life for it, regardless of the cost. The girl knows that the only one capable of destroying him is Her Majesty the Empress. To Eden's comment that Angelica loves Raniero, the girl, laughing heartily, affirms that she cannot love him. In her opinion, the Empress might be excited and rely on his strength. But what attracts her to him is only a survival strategy. However, according to Eden, if that were the case, the Emperor would have suspected her immediately, since he recognizes a lie well. Sylvia is sure that it is difficult for the Emperor to suspect Angelica, because he is deeply in love with her. Suddenly, Eden decides to inform the girl about his plan with the Empress to leave Actilos. When the girl asks what will happen next, he smiles and tells her that the Emperor must die. Lying in bed and confessing her love to Raniero, Angelica asks if she can leave the capital for a moment when he is on an expedition. A subject where, when he leaves and she has nightmares, no one will wake her up. That's why she wants to go recover. The Empress also decided on the place. It will be the county of Decino, where Countess Anastasia will take care of her. It seems like sponge sugar to Raniero, whom he wants to allow everything she asks for. During the meeting, the Emperor cannot concentrate on the topic, constantly thinking about Angelica's confessions of love. He states that the planned expedition will continue without changes and concludes the meeting. Recalling Nirm's pregnancy, Raniero asks the Duke, who is shocked by the Emperor's private conversation. The emperor asks if the duke is happy with the event, if he loves his wife, and how he understands what love is. The question is complicated, but since there is rarely an opportunity to speak directly with the emperor, the duke decides to avoid words that might upset him. He says he feels love when he sees his wife as an exceptional being. Love makes one forgive the impossible and be generous with what you don't like. From that, Raniero deduces that the empress considers him exceptional and unique. Angelica practices archery and is surprised by the emperor during the activity. Hugging and kissing her, he praises how well she learned to shoot. He worries about whether she will be okay without him, but she reassures him. It turns out that the emperor was already planning to assign her an escort so she would travel comfortably. Angelica wants to travel only with Sylvia, Sisson, and a porter, considering that she will feel more comfortable with familiar people close by. She understands that Raniero will surely assign someone to follow her, but it seems to her that everything will be fine if they don't get too close. The days grew colder, but Actilos' army was well prepared for a surprise attack on Zambinia. Before Actilos' army departed, Angelica went ahead and finished preparations for her treatment trip. They say goodbye to Raniero and riding in the carriage, the young woman leaves for the county of Ticino. After seeing her off, the emperor decides to hurry, as he has decided to conquer Zambinia. The countess is happy with the empress's arrival, although Duchess Narma warned her not to take risks. She finds it hard not to worry. Her husband has been unfaithful for a long time, and the son also left for another region because he got tired of his parents' marital arguments. If it weren't for the emerald mine she owns, her father-in-law would have kicked her out long ago. And the arrival of such a guest gives her reason to feel proud. The countess would like to announce to the entire county that the empress is visiting her. But she came mainly to rest. The woman wants to get close to Angelica, but without making her uncomfortable. The best has been prepared for the empress, and the service is also well trained to avoid mistakes. Angelica is satisfied with the treatment received, and Anastasia is happy to please her. She is intrigued by who the man traveling with them is, as all that is known is that he was hired by Sisson. And his name is Daniel. Apparently, by following them on this trip, he managed to gain a lot of trust in a short time. The gazes of the countess and Daniel cross frequently, and upon catching his smile, the woman blushes and gets nervous. It turns out that the courtship towards the countess, who has been living alone for a long time due to her husband's infidelities, was part of Angelica's plan. The plan was successful, and that same night, Daniel ended up in the countess's room, overwhelmed by the attention of a charming man. When the woman fell asleep, she carefully opened her dresser drawer and found the keys for which everything had started. The next day, the countess discovers the disappearance, and, horrified, realizes that Daniel might have been the thief from last night. She prepares to approach him to clarify everything, but the empress crosses her path. Who wants to talk to her? Anastasia requests to postpone the conversation due to an urgent matter, but suddenly, Angelica extends the same missing key to her. According to the empress, the woman dropped them yesterday when taking off her coat, but she kept silent so as not to put her in a tight spot. The countess does not remember having carried them with her yesterday, but the empress would not have stolen something like that. So she thanks her for the gesture. Angelica suggests they have tea together before lunch, and the countess gratefully accepts the gesture. There are several reasons why the empress chose this county for her escape. Firstly, it is located north of the capital, and from here they could go to the Temple of Tunia without crossing the mountain. Secondly, Anastasia, although a rich woman, her family position is unstable. So she must do whatever Angelica tells her to gain influence through her. While having tea, the empress complains to the countess about the number of strangers in the palace, which gives her dizziness. The woman, trying to please her, mentions a quiet villa nearby, where Her Majesty could settle. In fact, this villa on the edge of the domain was chosen as the starting point for the escape by Sisson and Eden in advance before their trip. Although staying in this villa was Angelica's initial plan, she finds it uncomfortable to see how the countess tries to earn her consideration. Upon her proposal to place guards at the house, the Empress refuses, as she herself is very good at shooting a bow. If the Countess allows the Empress to stay in the villa only with her escort, she promises to grant her a wish. Angelica likes that the villa is far from the mansion, and that the wall is so high that it is very difficult to cross. Now all the Empress has to do is ask the Countess to understand her desire to be alone, and hand over the keys. Finally, the four of them are alone, and Angelica notices that Sylvia seems very cheerful. The Empress is very worried because Eden included his escape plan without consulting her. Upon confirming that everything is going according to plan, they sit down to rest, and Angelica reflects on how hard it is for her to lie. Every day after the Empress's departure, Raniero continues to visit her palace. The servants have heard that he sleeps there daily, and they are already starting to worry if everything is fine with him. Before leaving this place tonight, Angelica approaches Sison with a request. She asks her to bring her papers and a pen to write a letter to the Emperor. In it, she tells him that she arrived safely in the county, that she is not having nightmares, and that she will recover soon. According to Angelica, when the Emperor's expedition ends, she wants to train again to prepare for the hunt. Reading her letter, Raniero thinks about stopping by to pick up Angelica after conquering the land of Zimbinia. On his way to the capital. According to Eden, 4 people can attract too much attention, so they should split into 2 groups. First, they will go north with the Empress, and a week later, Sylvia and Sison will go south. While preparing her things, Angelica worries that something might go wrong and they might discover her. Noticing her concern, Sison calms her mistress, as they will meet at the temple soon. Angelica hugs her faithful assistant, to whom she never confessed that she was not who she claimed to be. The Empress gets on her horse, and Sylvia asks if she will really be able to handle everything. Angelica wishes the maids good luck, and they set off with Eden. The closer the checkpoint gets, the more nervous the Empress becomes, and finally they arrive there. Angelica feels nauseous from distress, but Eden does not intend to delay. The guard who stops them demands to see the permit, and they hand over the token stolen from the Countess. Eden tells the guards that he and his wife are traitors, and traveled from south to north to take care of his sick mother. However, the guard, with a sardonic smile, asks them not to take him for a fool, since traitors do not have white and pleasant faces. It seems strange to Angelica that this man doesn't arrest them right there or call for help. She decides to intervene and praises the work of the guard, who works late for the good of Actilos. Angelica left most of her jewelry, fearing they might be discovered, but she took a gold bracelet which she now decides to give to the guard. The man bites the metal to check its authenticity, and convinced that it is real, lets the travelers pass. Once they cross the gate, Angelica suddenly starts crying and asks Eden not to turn back. He doesn't understand why she feels this way or if he should comfort her, but she insists he keeps going. The travelers arrive at a field covered with bright flowers and stop for a moment, fascinated by its beauty. For a moment, Eden thinks the Empress is crying again, but turning around, he sees she is smiling. A feeling of immense relief floods her, so great that she cannot contain her emotions. All her previous days were filled with efforts to survive. Angelica avoided crises and maintained alertness, always attentive and lucid. Now it doesn't matter if she screams or runs, because for the first time she feels completely free. Meanwhile, a servant sent by the Countess calls the villa to check if the Empress is doing well. He brings a gift for Angelica, but Sison, taking the basket, sends the unwanted guest away. Sylvia is happy because she confirms that no one knows that the Empress and Eden left the villa last night. The decision to wait a week before leaving was to create a distraction for the Empress. When the Empress's maids, living in the villa, show themselves to the public, it is natural to think that she is there too. But when the maids disappear, it will not be known exactly when Angelica's entourage left the county, which will cause confusion in the search. The Empress worries about the meeting with Serafina while they rest, but Eden advises her not to worry. He also advises her that, if she can, she should stop thinking about Raniero, because if she feels something for him, it could be painful. At night, Angelica suddenly feels the presence of someone approaching, and asks Eden to check his weapon. Eden shudders and asks her how she knew, and at that moment they attack the Empress, who pulls the bowstring taut. The young woman instantly shoots and kills one of the attackers, who turns out to be their leader. Eden kills another with his sword, but by miscalculating the force, he drives the weapon in so deep that he cannot pull it out. The young man is wounded in the hand, but Angelica manages to cover him in time, killing this attacker too. After finishing off the bandits, Angelica heals Eden's wound, who doesn't understand how she guessed the attack. It seems that, having spent so much time in Actilos, Angelica's intuition has strengthened considerably. Although they couldn't rest properly, they decide to hurry on towards the temple. Meanwhile, the Countess receives rejection after rejection for meeting the Empress, who alleges poor health. Although Sylvia and Sison had extra permits stolen by Eden, they did not go through the checkpoint, but took a secret shortcut silently used by local inhabitants. When bribes were necessary, Sison paid generously, so the search party will follow their trail. Thinking that only the Empress could pay like that, Raniero sees Angelica in a dream where she confesses her love to him and wakes up, as nothing like this had ever happened to him before. He feels the devil's breath on his back, whispering to him to forget all this and only remember the war. The blood and the screams. Although the group's speed is slower than in the expedition to the Temple of Tunilla, His Majesty's army advances steadily. The soldiers' morale is at its peak, as they have waited a long time for the conquest of the lands of Zimbinia. Precisely this slow advance makes them more relentless. Raniero is sure that when the battle begins, the enemy army will be easily captured. The devil is satisfied, because, far from Angelica, the Emperor has started obeying him well again. Duchess Nirma is informed of the Countess's visit, and she gets angry because Anastasia should have been receiving the Empress now. In the reception hall, she is met by a restless woman who screams, affirming that both have been deceived. The Countess recounts how the Empress asked to borrow a villa and then disappeared. Terror creeps into Nirma because, knowing how much the Emperor cherishes his wife, everyone related to her disappearance will be destroyed. Regaining her composure, she orders the Countess to calm down and decides to investigate everything before the Emperor returns. Anastasia suspects that Angelica left the county some time ago, although the Empress's disappearance was discovered this morning. After hearing her story, Nirma decides to check all the permits, as the fugitives might have forged documents. She also orders an investigation into the illegal path used by the poor inhabitants. Angelica and Eden continue on their way, but the cloud cover is very dense, and the young man fears it might start snowing. The Empress believes everything will turn out fine, and this time Eden easily trusts her instinct. The girl feels someone whispering words in her ear that, by following them, make her path easier. Hearing the voice again and heading where it pointed, they see an abandoned house in front of them. Upon entering and looking around, the travelers, confirming there is no one, decide to spend the night in the house. Eden goes to look for firewood for the fireplace and asks Angelica to tie up the horses for now. Under a roof and with the warmth of the lit fire, the girl feels much calmer. Eden starts a conversation with her about her previous life and, surprised, he notices that she struggles to remember her real name. Angelica reminds him that her past life was not so radiant, but in the end, she flees from here as she does not feel safe in this life either. Eden confesses to the girl that he is actually the son of a wealthy family, as she suspected. Angelica, laughing, asks him if he confessed to show off to her. Suddenly leaning over her, Eden asks her if the commitment to help him with the money will give her the confidence to return. He conveys Sylvia's words that Angelica does not love the Emperor, and that she chose him only to protect herself. Perhaps those words were true, because upon arriving here, the girl did everything possible not to hurt Raniero's feelings and save herself. After gaining his trust and starting to live normally, she convinced him and avoided everything she didn't want to do. Approaching Angelica and cupping her face with his hands, Eden asks her if she will really be fine if Raniero dies. As expected, it is difficult for her to answer that question, and perhaps her survival instinct deceives her. but she is sure that his death will not be a joyful thing for her. However, Angelica is not sure if she will mourn and suffer for this for the rest of her life. Although his face constantly appears in the girl's memory during such conversations, it is because she still feels a certain attachment. However, the moment she overcame those feelings and escaped from Actilos, the feeling of relief was just as sincere. Because that horror that tormented her until then disappeared that very day. 17 days have passed since the escape from Villa Decino. The weather is getting harsher, but there is very little left to arrive. Eden feels anxious that they will arrive later than expected and run into the Emperor at the temple. However, an enveloping voice surrounding Angelica whispers to her that this will not happen. The girl no longer feels her legs and cannot continue walking, so Eden carries her in his arms. Because stopping here is not possible. And so, finally, frozen and tired, the travelers arrive at the Temple of Tunia and enter inside. The archbishop who receives them asks Eden what happened to him and why he returned. Angelica reminds the bishop who she is and recounts the escape from Actilos. Kneeling down, she begs the servants of God for clemency of shelter and food. Eden begs the empress to react, but the girl lies on the floor completely without strength. Suddenly, she is surprised thinking that she is remembering Raniero's face again, and she doesn't understand why. When she is actually afraid of him. But memories appear one after another before her eyes, and she loses consciousness. Upon regaining consciousness, Angelica cannot understand where she is, as the temple room where she had been with Raniero did not look the same. The door opens and Serafina appears in the doorway with a plate of food, explaining that it is her room. At that moment, at the foot of the mountain and near the border of Zinbinia, the imperial army cannot advance further due to the bad weather. Raniero decides to return, but supplies might not be enough, so they must stop at the Temple of Tunilla on the way. After feeding Angelica, Serafina becomes interested in how the young woman managed to advance 17 days through the icy desolation. The saint asks the empress to tell her why she fled from Actilos. Initially, Ida was supposed to talk to Serafina, but now he is exhausted, and Angelica asks if she has already spoken with the saint. Serafina confesses feeling inadequate towards that man, as someone who despised her was suddenly exiled from the temple for confessing feelings for the saint. She understands that it cannot be a coincidence, as months later he returned to the temple along with the empress. That is why Serafina could not meet with Ada. It gave her fear and sadness. As expected, unlike what was read in the novel, Angelica perceives the emotions of someone so close in a completely different way. She finally decides to briefly tell Serafina that the Emperor of Actilos will soon arrive at the temple. Suddenly, beginning to choke and horrified by what she is about to say, Angelica asks the saint to kill her. The young woman trembles completely. Raniero's sweet voice directed at her echoes in her mind. She begs Serafina for mercy. Saint Tuania asks her to calm down, but Angelica insists that it is also in her own interest. However, she cannot say out loud that Raniero will try to dishonor and destroy Serafina. So she only mentions that it is also for Adon. To the question of how she knows, Angelica talks about a book of prophecies she found in the sanctuary. Taking the book out of her bag, the empress shows it to the saint, warning that only she can read what is written. Upon opening it, Serafina confirms that the pages are indeed empty. According to Angelica, Eden also knows this prophecy, since, according to it, he must die at the hands of Raniero. Serafina is shocked, but the empress understands that it is hard to believe. Angelica also reveals that, according to the prophecy, she must die first. Surprisingly, the saint easily accepts her story, stating that she believes her, and that she feels great pity. Lying in bed, Angelica reflects on Serafina's reaction, because although the saint understood her, all this seems strangely inappropriate to her. Upon leaving the temple before the crowd, Serafina announces the imminent arrival of a large imperial armada at the sanctuary. Tuania has already received help from Raniero, so now they must not refuse those who seek help in difficult times. People are restless, but everything the saint says carries the weight of dogma. and they debate how to position the troops. Eden, witnessing Serafina's speech to the people, understands that she has started to act. Raniero, after knocking on the temple door, learns from the archbishop that they already knew about his imminent arrival there. Sitting in the chapel, into which no outsider enters, Angelica hears a noise outside. And she understands that the emperor has already arrived. Since the day they locked her in the chapel, the young woman hasn't stopped thinking about Raniero leaving soon. But 3 days have already passed, and he hasn't moved from the temple. No one visits the room, but they always leave a plate with food near the door. According to the original story, a decisive meeting between the two should have already taken place. And Angelica doesn't understand why she is still here. Suddenly, the chapel door opens. Angelica stands up believing Serafina has returned, but it turns out to be Eden. Discovering that the saint has not appeared in this place for 3 days, the boy gets furious without understanding where she has gone. Eden wants to go out to look for her, but Angelica grabs his arm and asks him to stay, asking if the emperor is still there. He clutches his head and says that the situation has changed, and Raniero still hasn't met Serafina. Eden believes that the saint, who is supposed to greet the emperor at the temple, is deliberately avoiding him. The boy plans to modify the original plan to reach the sanctuary before Serafina kills Raniero. 10,000 soldiers have been stationed in Tuni and its surrounding villages, sleeping and eating in private homes. When the archbishop said they couldn't take care of so many, the emperor threw a bag of coins to the ground. However, people live by barter here, and gold has no value for them. Something that Raniero knows and deliberately took advantage of. Anyway, if Serafina kills the emperor and the soldiers are left without a leader, they will destroy this place. So they must leave before it happens. Eden asks the girl to focus now on only 2 things, Actilos' blood and the sword of Tuni. Suddenly, the boy asks Angelica to be quiet for a moment as he feels someone nearby. From the corner appears Raniero, who thought he heard his wife's voice.